Hi and welcome to my video where I want to show you my Capstone project, which is to-do list web application. First, I will tell you something about myself, then give you a short description of a project. Next, I will show you how my app works, and at the end, how I made it. Hello again, my name is Marek Jakubicki and I'm a highly motivated junior .NET developer. Or at least this is what I would like to be able to say about myself. I started my adventure with programming by creating a simple Android application for people buying their first apartment. I also played around with Angular, building an application that compares loan offers from different banks, counting all credit costs, installments, etc. However, I feel best in .NET architecture and C# language. And that's why I'm very happy to have opportunity to show you my skills in building an API. The purpose of this application is a simple to-do list web app that helps manage countless tasks between collaborants. Target users are actually all small teams that want to manage their tasks and swap to-do lists between collaborants. And major features in short description is that this application is available by any web browser in any device. It can let you log in, see all your lists, manage tasks, delete, edit, and swap to-do lists between all collaborants in your team. I implemented some user stories, which you can divide into three major epics, which include registration, managing lists, and managing tasks. But let's not read this in here. What about show you how it works? And here we are at the login page. The application is live, so you can test it by yourself. If I try to log in with wrong password, of course, I cannot do that. I have to provide valid credentials. And here we are. Before to-do lists, let's see all the users I have in my team, with me marked in blue that I'm currently logged in. And let's click my own to-do list as a leader. I see all my tasks separated by the status. And let's try add the new one. And let's see what happens behind the scenes. And what happened is we actually received bad request error status code, and we received error response with a message that is presented to the user. What it means is that client app has no idea about validation data. Everything is done by the server. Let's create valid task this time, and it appears at the top. Let's enter and see what we can do. We can change the status to completed or in progress. We can change, of course, the name, and the same story here. If we try to do this in the wrong way, we cannot do that. We get a bad request if we try to save it. We can add description. We can set the deadline to maybe today. We can set today's some reminder date. We cannot change created date, nor in the client nor in the server, and we can mark it as a favorite. And if we click save, we see two indicators, because it's my favorite and because it's to date. And because of that, it also appears in my inside my two built-in to-do lists. First one includes all the due today tasks, which is our valid task. And the second one is favorite tasks, which has every favorite tasks, but this shows different starts from the newest at the top. And what is important, I can give this task to another user. Let's change name for Marek from admin, and let's change admin to Marek and save it. I no longer have this list. Let's log out and log in as Marek. And here we are for Marek from admin. And I see all the tasks that were inside this list. I can, of course, also delete it. I can add my own tasks. It's belongs to me, so I can do whatever I want. And of course, what we can do is to add new user. But we will do that when I will show you how I made this app. So let's go next. And here we are at the Visual Studio. We can see solution. First, Blazor app is a client app. To-do app, application services and data access are the API, and the tests for the testing purposes. To-do app is a program that is responsible to show data to the world using controllers. Application services is all the logic that uses handlers to handle requests and responses. Very simple. And data access provides connection and model to the database. And let's see what's inside the startup class. And we register some services. Of course, we use cores. We use authentication with our basic authenticator handler. We will see in a moment. I use Fluent Validator to validate my requests, and through this method is available in the controller. And I use a very nice framework for single responsibility pattern, which is Mediator. And what it does, it handles my responses and requests by handlers. And of course, I register query executor and command executor because I follow course pattern, which separates those two things. And of course, with help of entity framework, I register storage context, and of course, everything is done by controllers. We will see in a second. And to see how the application works, what about using Postman and try to hit some endpoint? Of course, I provide with a link to the whole documentation with help of Postman, when you can see everything that this API is capable of. And let's send this request and see what happens. Of course, nothing happens because we didn't start our server. We don't need Swagger. And here we go again. First thing we enter is basic authentication handler. When we see if we can authenticate this user, this is allowing anonymous endpoint, so it's going to be very quick. And we end up in user's controller, and we are going to AP controller base. Where we first thing we check is that our model is valid. And to do that, we use Fluent Validator, and if every rule is passed, we say, okay, this request is valid. We can go now to the endpoint. And at this endpoint, it's a very nice, very generic controller, where all it does, it calls a handle requests method. So let's see what happens inside. Okay, at this moment the controller is valid, and we go by using Mediator. We get our request, and what we do is try to get some response. Because this is a command, we enter with a command executor. We get our context with database. Of course, it's injected to the add user handler, which comes next. And in this handler, the whole magic actually happens, and every handler is responsible for handling different requests and different, of course, responses. In here, because we are adding new user, we have to hash a password that we entered. We never store real password in database. So let's skip that maybe. And then we map our request data to the user entity model, which is the database model. Let's go in here. Then we are ready to create our command from this parameter, with this parameter. And what this handler does is trying to execute that command. So let's go and see how command executor works. It's also very generic thing. It handles every command at this program. We enter add user command because this is what we want to do, and he does only one thing. He's trying to add new user. If everything is alright and we didn't encounter any exception, For example, if we try to add user that already exists in our database, we would catch an error and return username and not available error. But at this point, we have this username in our database, so everything is fine. And we return add new user response, where we map to the user model, because we don't want to show every information that we have about this entity. We have full control about what we show to the world. And then we go next with our response. We don't have any errors, so the error is null, and return this OK status response. And at this point, we see in Postman that we get status 200 OK, and we have our response data with new user, which come in handy. We have full control about our error response, because if we encounter our response includes error from handler, then we make our own error types when we have the full control what we send back to the user. And as we saw in the client, when we try to log in with wrong credentials, we received this exact message because we get not authenticated error, which comes in very handy. We have full control about it. And because we saw some command, let's see some endpoint that uses queries, and get all to-do list query as endpoint is quite a nice example, because we can get from query name parameter, and if we go to the query that gets all to-do lists, we can pass this parameter, which is a name, and we can return only lists that matches this name. And because we follow the course pattern and single responsibility pattern, it's very easy to do those things. And I also created some tests, when you can see in here, where I test my handlers, because the whole magic is inside them. And I also test requests validators, because they are responsible to validate data that my server receives. So it's very important to test that everything works all right. And I test every single handler that I have in my application. If it responds with wrong responses, I mean errors, if it responds with good information, when everything is all right. So it's tested very, very deeply. And few words about the client app, which is a Blazor application using WebAssembly. I have pages responsible to views. I have models that matches the entities I use in my database, and I have services to all the data logic, and they are registered in the startup program. I use for every endpoint, every controller, another service. Let's see this one, and it hits the endpoints that I have in my database. I also created HTTP service that has injected every necessary components, and manages every kind of HTTP method, and of course does the things with request and response. And I've made a local storage service that stores in the local memory the information about the page where I came from. It came in handy because when I deleted some tasks from the view, it swapped the view to the back to the to-do lists, but I wanted to go back maybe to the favorite page, so favorite tasks page. So I had to remember the previous page I was as a user. Of course, I have authentication service where I try to login register endpoints, and of course a local storage service where I store information about currently logged in user. So it automatically implements the authentication headers. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for watching and see you next time.